Assalamu alaikum. We'll just do a quick revision of what we did last week. So, alhamdulillah, we've covered the basics. We discussed what the harakat is supposed to sound like, tanween, why certain things are written in a specific way, as well as knowing the different levels of where you're at. We are going to start off, inshallah, with the makharij of the huruf. Then we're progressively going to make it, you could say, more advanced in terms of pronunciation, knowing the sif of each letter. And the last thing, is our aim, which is what we're going to work towards, is being in a state where we can differentiate between different letters when you put the heavy and the light together, so we don't cross-contaminate the pronunciation. So just quickly, we said last week, those heavy and light letters, the biggest problem that we tend to find is that people, could it be because of their cultural accents, the way they got brought up, or not just the way they got brought up, they can pronounce things correctly, but when you put it next to a heavy letter, the heavy letter tends to dominate. So inshallah, this is what we're going to be working towards this week and the future weeks as well with regards to correcting the way we say Fatiha. So inshallah, I'll probably start off with examples. I'll do my own recitation before we break off to groups, and then we can discuss the common mistakes with the pronunciation. So here we said specifically about the lam, just to recap. When we break things down to letters, always break them down to three fundamental forms or vowel sounds. We said it's a, for example, a, u, e. If you're saying o, then that's a composite of two letters. So therefore, the best thing to do if you ever earn your own and you don't have a sheikh and you want to check, break it down to three simple steps, 1, 2, 3, and see, compare your pronunciation to what it's supposed to be. The best thing I advise, however, as well, is to get a tape. So whether it's a cassette player, CD player, MP3, anything, videos, we've got plenty of videos online today where you can actually cross-check yourself with regards to your pronunciation against a trained sheikh. Obviously, I'm not saying this is no substitute to having actually a sheikh or qari teach you one-on-one, but this is something to consider as well, just for homework in your own time. So inshallah, we'll just quickly revise what we said here. So lam's got two characteristics. It can be heavy or light. What we did for last week's exercise is we said if it has a kasra before the word Allah, is pronounced lighter. If it's dhamma or fatha, you just make it heavy or mufakhama. So the examples we have here, as we said, Bismillah, afillahi shak, qulillahum huwa Allah, sayu'tina Allah, wa idh qalu Allahum, wadhkuru Allah. So you can hear there is differences between the light and the heavy one. If this sounds really basic to you, then obviously we're going to be starting to apply that very soon, inshallah, in the practical examples. So inshallah, we'll go to the next slide. We'll jump really quickly into the other letters. Oh, yes. Yeah. So we're going to start with Surah Al-Fatiha for practical examples, and then we're going to work our way backwards from Quran, from Surah Al-Nas, just so we can cover the basic, you could say the most well-read 20 surahs in each Fard Salah. We'll go to the next slide. Alhamdulillah. So now we got Ha. Now, Ha is a really interesting letter because it tends to be, if it's understressed, it comes out as a Ha. If it's overstressed, it can get confused with a Ah. So whatever you do, you need to access it, not to be specific. You don't really exercise the throat. You need to exercise the middle of the throat. This is supposed to be a very light letter. So I'll give you an example. Like when you say it, it sounds like the two examples we've got here. Hasada, hashara. And to do this, you actually need to exercise that middle part of your throat, right in the middle. So we'll go to the next slide, just to show you what it looks like. There we go. So here, you can see we've got 3 points of the throat. I'm interested in the one that's in between. So in the second arrow to the bottom, right in the middle, this is called in Arabic lisan al-mizmar, or I'm not really good in my biology. Some of those Harvard guys can probably help me. Is that the epiglottis, as we call it in English? This is basically the key tool that you have in the back of your throat that actually gets that sound. So if you have never pronounced this or experienced this in your own language, my best exercise is physically tell you to do to find out where it is, lie down on your back, on your bed or something, and pretend to have a gargling voice and go like this and let out the air. When you tend to gargle, less air comes out. This is a result of that muscle or moving backwards. So obviously it's restricting water coming into your throat when you're gargling. Likewise, ha and na are very, very similar. They come from similar makharij in the throat. The only difference is the amount of air they can control. So if we go to the next slide, I'll show you what I mean. So you can see, as we said, ha and na are very different. The only difference is that it's the amount of air and flexibility you have in that lisan mizmar of the epiglottis. For the ha, it goes backwards slightly. So I'll talk about the common mistakes that happen. If it's a ha, it's because you're not, it's a ha when you don't exercise the middle of your throat. You bring the muscle back slightly, it becomes ha because you're slightly exercising it. You bring it back nearly all the way, and then becomes a. So a is a heavier version of ha when you think about it, because you actually need to take the lisan al-mizmar all the way to the back. So I'll say it again, different levels. You got the ha, no throat. It comes from the throat, but no muscle is exercised. You got the ha, the epiglottis is engaged. And then you got the a. It's fully engaged to the point that it's nearly touching the back of the throat, but it's still letting the air in. So that's the difference in the characteristics from the ha, and a. They're throat letters, but because you're engaged in different muscles when you pronounce them, they come out different. So we'll go to the next one, inshallah. Oh, yes. This is a favorite one. So ba is pretty straightforward. Mashallah, you can find it in English, Arabic, other languages as well. Exercises the lips. The interesting thing that we need to take into account is that it quite often is mispronounced as a heavy letter, because when in the context that we talk about, like if I can get any single person in the room or in the kids' classes, they'll all say ba, bu, bi. That's not the problem. The only problem is when you put it in context, when you're actually doing a proper word, like say, وَكَانَ رَبُّكَ بَصِيرًا. So it's بَصِيرًا. Example we have here is بَخِلَ, barara. What happens sometimes, in anticipation of a heavy letter, people tend to drop the tone of the ba to be in line with the heavier one. So they read, I said it correctly to begin with. I said basira with a ba with a sharp fatha. If I pronounce it incorrectly, it'll sound like basira, ba. So when you look at ba, I'll do this troubleshooting again. When you're on your own, this is what you can do. Go ba, bu, bi. Basira. Then you go, ha, I'm actually saying ba, not ba. Now, this might sound extremely basic to you, but I'm giving you this. This is actually an advanced exercise we teach at an ijaza level and above. This is not in the text. This is outside the scope because it's more into the lines of Arabic. Sibawayh, the famous Arabic grammarian, who, subhanAllah, is actually of Persian origin. He wasn't even an Arab. He actually wrote the entire syllabus of every single pronunciation and qawaid of the Arabic language. SubhanAllah, his teacher, the Khalil Ahmad al-Farahidi, his teacher, it was said that he used to sit down and he said he used to taste the letters. كان يذوق المخارج basically, or الحروف. He'll sit down and keep reciting, wow, where is it coming from? Where is this? And subhanAllah, all these people were actually that the fathers of the Arabic grammar are actually not Arabs. Sibawayhi, or Sibawayh, as people say, is actually Persian. You've got Ajurmiya, which has been taught for nearly at least 600 years, probably tops, even more. This is actually written by Ibn Ajrum, who's actually of Berber origins from Africa. He's ethnic African. He's not even Arab. So, mashallah, the exercises I'm giving to you, if you treat them as basic exercises, you only get the basic skills out of them. But if you treat them as something that is really specific and has got weight to it, it'll really go with you a long way. So I'm not trying to overcomplicate the ba, but inshallah, once you start getting more proficient, it's going to make more sense, inshallah. So we'll go to the next slide. So it's a simple, easy pronounced letter. The tongue remains flat. You're relying mostly on the lips for this one. So go to the next one. Da. Da is pretty straightforward. It has to be light. Don't confuse it with a light letter. So I'm not really going to dwell on it too much. I'll just give an example later. We'll go to the next slide. So here, the thing to remember with a da, think of it as a D. You pronounce the D by hitting the hard palate on the front of the mouth of the top jaw, but below the teeth. If you happen to make this letter lightly, it'll change it to something else. So just remember that. Go to next. Oh, yes. So I'm not going to dwell on it too much. We've covered it previously. But we said two things to remember for ah. Ah, you can think of it as full exercise when you push the back of your throat. What you don't want to do is let out too much air when you say it. So just this is going to make sense once we jump to the practical side. So shall I go to the next one? Oh, yes. So it's the same slide show we mentioned earlier, but you can see there's a stronger emphasis. There's less air coming out with the ha. So we'll go to the next one. Oh, actually, sorry, we'll go back once. Just one more. So a common mistake I usually see in Fatiha, we're not going to cover this here, but sometimes people don't overstress the a. Because what happens, like any muscle, when you go and you lift the clothes in the morning, you lift them quite easily. You don't lift them with difficulty. And likewise, the a is supposed to come out naturally. If you overemphasize it, what happens? The air gets trapped in your throat. And then you can't let the letter out. An'amta. So an'amta. Some people, what they do sometimes, to make it easier to pronounce, they say an'amta. An'amta. But what happens is that you're actually cutting up the word. So the trick is you're transitioning to the point where not much air is coming out, and then you're releasing it. An'amta. You don't say an'amta. But we'll cover it later, inshallah. Right, this is the last one I'm going to do today, inshallah. For those that are going to do, inshallah, ijaza later on, you're going to have to really come across this. And this becomes extremely difficult when it comes to teach. Ra is the most complex letter when it comes to pronunciation. Because not only does it have two characteristics, you have to look at the characteristics of the letter itself and the letters before it. So just as a simple trick to make your life really easy, if it's same thing we did with the lam. If it's got a fatha or a dhamma, you make it heavy. If it's got a kasra, you make it light. The other advanced forms we'll cover later on. But what I want to do is a common mistake people tend to do sometimes. They'll overstress the ra. They'll be like, for example. So more than one comes out. Ra is one of those vibration characters, as we call them. The trick to getting it correctly is you're supposed to vibrate. I'll show you to the next slide, sorry. Jazakallah khair, bro. So here, the tongue, when you look at it, the sides of the tongue, the front part, are in touch with the hard palate. So that's one key thing to remember. If you leave it there for too long, that's how you get the vibration. It'll say Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, and it comes out maybe once or twice. What you need to do is touch it once and retract the tongue. Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. Get one clean flick. And this will come with practice. If you do let me know if you have any issues with regards to actual physical impairments, like overcrowding of the teeth. I can probably show you a trick to do it if your teeth aren't lined up correctly, but it's still achievable to do, even with a misaligned jaw. Just for a hint. We'll go to the next one before we break off, inshallah. So this is the key trick I'd like you to remember. As we said, if it's a fatha or dhamma, it's a heavy ra. If it's a kasra is the broken form. It comes out really light. So what happens, as we said, in order to make them sound different, you do exactly what we did with the last exercise. You raise the back of the tongue. So you don't say ri, you say ra. So that's the difference between them. Ra, ri. I think that should be enough for today. Any feedback so far? Any questions?
Any questions from here?
Just when we say lisan al-mizmar, it's in Arabic or sort of in English, the reed, the piece that vibrates when you blow in an instrument.
Okay,
Yeah. Could be the same translation.
Okay. But we have brother Wasim with us, and he was just commenting on that. The what was that?
Lisan al-mizmar.
Lisan al-Mizmar also has the translation of the reed, like the end of the pipe.
The translation, sorry?
Yep, the Lisan al-Mizmar.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is also translated as the reed.
Oh, the reed. That's interesting. No, Jazakallah khair. I remember that. I mean, it's good to get feedback. Jazakallah khair.
I have a question, but it will be more advanced, and later on I can ask you as well about the ra. When you said that when we end a letter in the, at the ra, sometimes you vibrate more or less, or how much you have to vibrate the tongue.
With this one, what we tend to do is I'm not going to talk about shadda because we'll cover this later. But basically, it's you got the word basir. Now, when you look at basir, as I said, when we start, as you know what we teach in the other classes, that's because it's got a sukoon on it. The question comes up now, it's like, okay, you said what is fatha dhamma kasra? What happens if it has a sukoon? Sukoon is a confusing case because sukoon literally means to stay still or to be silent. So that's what people get shocked when you give them this, like a simple rule is like, well, how does this rule work? So the general rule of thumb is that if the letter has a sukoon on it, or if you stop at the end of the sentence, everything is made silent by default at the end of the sentence. You look at the haraka before it. So an example I can give you now is وَكَانَ رَبُّكَ بَصِيرًا. So I said بَصِيرًا. Now with ra, what's happened at the moment, I have a kasra before it, but here it has a fatha. The last letter is actually an alif. بَصِيرًا. So but if I say it in a different case, when it's actually the last letter, words that come to mind are like Inna Allah Sami'un Basir. So Basir. So here I look at it, I've got a kasra, it qualifies. So that's just something to remember in mind. I mean, we're not going to dwell on it too much. My concern at this stage is we want to get the ra pronounced correctly. And then inshallah we'll move on to the different characteristics of it, just because of it's kind of like out of the scope.
Okay, inshallah.
Any more questions?
Nothing from here.
Okay, what we can do now, we can probably break off and we'll cover the first, maybe, let's just say, I'm looking at the number of people here, so this is actually pretty good. We'll probably cover the first 4 ayat of Surah Al-Fatiha. And you're probably aware the brothers are already being taught under me, like, try to make it as ijaza as possible, while taking into account people who might be completely new to them. So we'll go off and we'll inshallah come back, inshallah. Shouldn't be too long.
Jazakallah khair.